let's move forward. Let's add some thickness to this. But first things first is we need to create surfaces, right? So we need to go to our, I'm already on it, but everybody else needs to go to their landscape topo surfaces. The next thing we need to do is we need to hit show. If you guys have all this extraneous information on, let's go ahead and turn it off. So I'm just going to go through and turn all that business off. We don't need it right now. And there. Okay, so we did our first surface, right? Now somebody brought up a good point. Can you do all this at once now that the curves are in the right place? Yes, yes you can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that solid we made, and I'm also going to delete that planar surface we made. We're going to start over. So now all we have is just our lines, right? So we're back from square one. We have our first line down here at the 0 point, which you can see it lines up there, the 0 point. And so let's begin to do this. So let's make sure your landscape topo surfaces is selected, and let's planar surface every single one of these. So highlight them all, and let's go planar surface. Now if you notice, all the curves are selected right now. Every curve we use to create a planar surface. Now we have two options. Because we have such a clean model, we could just turn those curves off here in the layers, so they're out of our way. Or, since they're already selected, we can hide them, right? So I'm just going to hide them because I want everybody getting used to hiding things. And so now we have all of our surface sections, right? So now we need to extrude every single one of these. So let's go to our solids and landscape topo solid, make that the selection. And let's select everything, and let's extrude the surfaces. And make sure you're in the positive direction, and let's type 5 feet. And now if you notice, once you've done that, all your surfaces are still selected. Let's hide those. So I'm going to hide. And we have our topography made. See how that was done much easier? Now before I showed you how to do the river a certain way, right? And that was so you guys could get comfortable using the commands, getting used to it. And I wanted you to keep everything on one plane. Now if keeping everything on one plane isn't an issue, and you're okay with having your curves and your planes not on a flat surface, but extruded with your solids, this is the way you're going to do it. And you saw how easy it was in the end. We didn't have to do each one individually. We were able to do them all at once after we moved our curves in the proper location. So you could see the advantages of actually moving the curves versus keeping them on a flat plane. I want to show you guys one other thing with this. Let's see what time it is. Yeah. I want to try something with this. This is going to be experimental right here. Let's see how well it works out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type show, and it's going to bring back my surfaces and curves that are in here. So when I highlight all this, it'll say 29 poly surfaces, 29 surfaces, 29 curves. So it's letting me know all the information is there. I'm going to go back to our curves layer, landscape topo curves. And I'm going to hide the solids because we've taken care of that. And I'm also going to hide the surfaces. So now what are we left with? We're left with what we had originally, the curves. Now, I want to attempt something here. Everybody, let's create a new layer. And if it doesn't work out, we'll delete this layer, right? So we're going to create this layer under the surfaces. Let me close everything down here. So under the surfaces, open that up. And let's go to new sublayer. So if I close my building masses, you'll see it's right here. Right? And it came below building masses. Let's move it all the way up to the top so we know if we don't like it, we'll just delete it. So I'm going to name this landscape topo. And I'm going to, instead of saying surfaces, I'm just going to say loft. And we can leave it black, or yeah, let's just leave it black for now. So let's make that our selected layer. So now that we've done that, let's use a command that we used on the first day of class, right? When I showed you guys how to make a solo cup, we had two curves separated from each other, and we wanted to create a surface between those two curves, and it's called lofting. So let's try some lofting here. Let's see if lofting will work for this. And first off, I tried it just to see, and I knew it wasn't going to work. I selected everything and I said loft. And you see all the craziness that's happening there, and this line that tries to connect itself to all these curves, and how the arrows are going in all different directions. That's a big red flag, right? That when I hit enter, it's not going to be anything that is useful or that I want. So I hit enter and it's giving me my options here, and you can already see the craziness that it's creating, right? So it's attempting to loft all these curves together. And once I hit OK, you can see what the heck it does. That's a big error, right? That's mess upon mess upon mess in one command. So obviously that's not going to work, right? But what if we take it incrementally? What if we go little bit by little bit? Maybe it'll be able to understand the information a little bit better. So let's type loft, and let's select our first profile on the bottom, and then let's select the next profile above that one. So now that we have those two selected, we're going to attempt to, just like the red solo cup, loft a surface between these, right? So let's hit enter. Now it's asking me drag seam adjust, so I'm going to zoom in right here and check this out, see what's going on. And it looks like one is facing one direction and one is facing another, right? So that's a little bit weird to me. So I'm going to see if I can't adjust that. Maybe I can flip the seam, and let's see if I can't flip that seam as well. So they look like they don't want to go in the same direction. So maybe that's an issue, maybe not. One second. So now that I got that, it's asking, I'm going to hit enter, and you can see this is way more manageable, right? It's actually producing a result that's good for us. And so I'm going to hit OK. And if I turn off my curves lofting, and I'm going to select what it just lofted, and it looks like it created a loft, right? It lofted those two curves together. So it seemed to work, right? So I'm going to pause for questions. Okay, so I'm going to re-loft this and show everybody how I did it again. So you're just going to select the two curves and hit loft, and the dialog box will come up. We don't have to worry about any of this information for now. And let's hit OK. So it's created it for us, right? And that's really good. And so now I'm going to hide it, what I just created, so it's out of our way. And I'm going to type loft, and let's do it for the next set. So I'm going to select these two, and I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit enter again, and it looks like it did it for us, right? And so I'm just going to continue this process and just go all the way up and just keep lofting. So there, we're starting to get some issues, right? Once you make it to that spot. The reason why I had an issue there is because when I hit loft and I went and looked at my two arrows, you'll notice that this arrow is not on an edge or an end point. And so what I did is I moved it to the end point and I adjusted it. And then when I hit enter, it worked out and it actually created it for me. So I'm going to try the next one now. Seems to be good. So you see this process, right? If you turn off the curves, you can see that it's building it up just the same. And I'm going to just real quick turn on the Topo Surfaces, or I'm sorry, the Topo Solids, what we created, so we can reference the difference between the two. So you can see already right here the difference. Our Topo Surfaces are just extruded objects, where our lofting is actually taking the profile there, and so you can see it's actually a little bit more accurate to what maybe a hillside would look like versus what the topography is creating for us. And so the one thing about this with lofting is it's ugly. Do you see how terrible it looks? And so that's why this isn't the way I'm showing you guys how to do it, because the other way looks a lot cleaner, looks nicer, less messiness. And so you can see this right here. I mean, it's not pretty. I mean, when you go into render mode, it looks more like a hillside. And it doesn't look so ugly because it has all those faceted surfaces. But when you're in shaded mode, which is the way I like to work, you can see how ugly it looks, and it just doesn't really look right. And the other issue at hand with this is, what do you do when you get to a moment where you have to break up your lofts and now it's separated, right? So how am I going to connect those two surfaces together? When I try to do it between those three curves, you see how the points are everywhere? And when I hit enter, it creates a mess. And that's not going to work for us. So lofting has its reasons and times to use it, but you can see right here it became an issue, right? So if you were trying to loft all this and then you got to this point and you're like, okay, well, what do I do now, right? So maybe lofting wasn't the best option. And so that's why I showed you guys the other option, and I showed you sort of what can happen when you loft things, you know, that might be too complex. I think there's another way to get around this. Let's check here. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Yeah, I don't quite know what happened here. Let's see. So it's this one, that one, and that one. So I must not have brought everything up properly. So back to the model. We need to, now that we have our topography, landscape topography taken care of, we need to now use a command we used previously. It's called scale 1D. And we need to scale 1D this object, or this solid here, to the proper location. It looks like my stuff is off a little bit. Okay, so we notice that the landscape is floating right now, and so we just need to scale 1D and bring it down to the level of everything else. So I'm going to go scale 1D, and it's asking for the origin point. Since we're only using one object, we're totally fine here. So I'm going to choose the top of it, and now it's asking for a reference, so I'm going to choose the bottom of it, and now I can stretch it downward, and I'm going to stretch it down to the same point as everything else down here. And so now that bottom topography solid has now become as thick as everything else. So if you go around the whole model now, you'll see it's the same thickness everywhere. If you look at it from below, you'll see it's the same thickness. This is really good to do if you're planning on making an actual physical model. and you need to cut out everything by hand, this is the template for it. This is exactly how you would do it. So for future reference, if anybody ever is planning on building a site model, it's worth it to spend a couple hours building a model like this first, so that way you have all your pieces figured out. Because we could go in, we could buy a bunch of cardboard or a bunch of foam, and we could start building all this stuff up, right? And we could cut out each one of we could cut this piece out, cut the U out. We could cut a rectangle piece, then we can cut out a U and set it on top of it, and we can cut the next layer of foam, set it there, next layer of foam, next layer of foam, next layer of foam. Maybe right here we actually build this as a hollow box, or we build it up layers of foam or material, and then we know our building shapes. And so one thing real quick is, I showed you guys how to do this, and I'm just going to re-show you how to do it again. And I'm just going to select one object to do this. So I'm going to select this building right here in the corner, and I'm going to do zoom select, and now I'm zoomed in on it. And I want everybody to be aware of this quick command right here. If you want to hide everything else in the model except for the object you have selected, you can type the command invert. So what invert does is literally what it means: select everything that you don't have selected. So what it does is it selects everything else. And once it does that, I can type hide, and now it hid all the information that I didn't want to see. So I'll do that again. I'm going to select this building mass. I'm going to type invert, and now if I zoom out, you can see it's selected everything else that's visible. And I'm going to type hide, and now it's left me with that box. So let's say for in another class, if you need to actually build this box and you want to know how to build it, we can go to a command I showed you, which was Unroll Surface. And when we hit enter, it's now created that surface flat for us. So if we printed this out and we cut it out of a piece of paper, and every single place where there's one of these hard seam lines, that exactly right there, if we folded it on every single one of these, we'd be able to fold this thing into a box. And you would get the exact result as what you saw in the model three-dimensionally. And the way I did this was from a command called Unroll Surface. So let me pause.